that confidence comes from proving to yourself over time that when you tell yourself you'll do something, you will. And just building up that library, that history of experience. It's like, damn it, when I say I'm going to do something, I don't have to tell anybody else, because it was enough that I told it to myself. And I've experienced, when you have a streak of 7,000 consecutive kept commitments, it's pretty likely you're not going to fumble it on 7,001.
What a pleasure to be with you, Jeff Lerner. I have a great story, and we were just talking about you made the jump from broke artist to a very successful entrepreneur. So yeah, we've got a lot to talk about, and I'd love to start there if we could, a bit of your background and where it all started from.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. But first of all, Lawrence, I'm excited to be here on the show. I love the show, and I love the theme of the show, the way you've brought together sports and parenting and investing and just, frankly, it's like, to me, it's like all the stuff of having a really rich, fulfilling life. You got to bring all these things together. And I love that there's one place where we can go talk about those things. But anyway, yeah, for me, I dropped out of high school because I had a pretty early sense that I was not wired like most people. Like I wasn't going to be happy, going to school, getting a job, doing the grind. And I was willing, I had this early reckoning of like, I've got to orient my life towards something more than money. Not even just like, oh, I don't need to be a billionaire, but more like, I just don't want my freaking life to be defined by the grind, by that Maslow, hierarchical lower level order needs of like, I just got to survive and put, create food and shelter. Like what can I do to sort of tend to those things while leaving as much space for freedom and self-determination in my life as possible? And so ironically, I landed on being a musician which most parents would say, being a musician is a terrible idea. You'll never make any money. Yeah. But as far as skills that create absolute freedom, you go anywhere in the world where there's more than a few hundred people living in a town. And if you can play a guitar or a piano or bang a drum, you can probably find a gig and somebody will probably give you a meal and put you up in their attic apartment or whatever. Like musicians and artists in general, like it's a very hard way to get rich, but there's a sort of a social support mechanism in place because society values the arts. And so anyway, I dropped out of high school my sophomore year or my junior year after much struggles through school because I didn't get the point, because it's like, this all feels like I'm just on an assembly line toward a job at some point. And I don't see, how that applies to me. So finally, to the school's relief, I dropped out because they didn't know what to do with me either. And I became a professional jazz musician. And I guess I dropped out at 16. I spent the next 2 years just practicing all day, every day, trying to get good enough to really be a professional. And by 18 or 19, I was able to start getting enough work that I could make a very meager living as a musician. And I had a really delightful career for about 10 years. I mean, it's a hard life, but for 10 years, I supported myself as a professional working piano player and vocalist. And then money got even tighter. Well, there's a whole other story there, but yeah, that was the first 10 years anyway.
Well, I think so many people chase a career they don't like for money to think that when they get the money, they can get the freedom. So kudos to you as a young man to figure out that that's not the path you want to go down. And I've been so lucky that I left a finance company when I was 24, but up until then, I was of the belief where they worked me like a dog, 15-hour days, absolutely miserable, getting treated like shit, making all this money, only getting a fraction of it. But my mentality at the time was, listen, if I can sacrifice my 20s, make a lot of money, then I can do the things that I want to do. And luckily, I managed to, it didn't sacrifice all my 20s. I left and I set up my own company, and I ended up doing a semi-retirement at 30 to follow my sporting dreams. So it was very similar trajectory to you, in the sense that we both figured out as young people that chasing money you see it so much in business. When people chase money at the expense of their relationships, their health, their happiness. They forget about the passions and the things that when they were young light them up. So I think that's amazing. And I think it's amazing that you said you still play every day. It's still a part of you. You haven't lost it, but I'm sure there was a time when you said money was getting tighter. There's a time when I'm not sure if it was with you when you already got married and you started your family, but life is expensive when you're supporting a family. So what was that like when you were following your passion, you were your own man, you had your own schedule? I'm sure even now looking back, I'm sure it was a very fun time of your life when you think back to those memories. But what was the financial tipping point, I guess, when you realized you had to make a change?
Well, my challenge was I couldn't decide. I mean, I dropped out of high school and honestly, the next 5 or 6 years were amazing. I was a Bohemian musician. My parents let me stay at their house because they said, well, you would have been here anyways, finishing high school. So sure, stick around. And they had a piano and I started teaching myself. But then when I was 18, they moved out of state and I stayed in Houston. They moved to a smaller town. I needed to be in a big city to make a living as a musician. So I stayed and I was on my own at about 18, maybe 19. And the problem is, and it's funny because I mentor or at least try to counsel or give advice to lots of young people, especially young men now, whether teens and 20s, because I look back on myself at that age, and I think I did a fundamental thing right, which was I untethered myself from the traditional societal notion of chasing money. But I also wasn't really clear on everything that correlated to that. And what I mean is I was still a young man who desired a family or like a domestic, I'm not like a serial, what do they call it? Dating, like a player or something. Like I just wanted to meet a nice girl and settle down and have a house and maybe have some kids. Well, those are two horses that you can't ride that are very difficult to ride at the same time, right? Like I want to have a traditional nuclear family that's, playing catch on the weekends, or I want to be an artist, like not just an artist, a jazz musician, right? Like an avant-garde, sort of esoteric subgenre of music where I'm never going to really make any money. And there's really no aspiration to get discovered and, go on tour and be big. I mean, not that certain jazz artists don't do well, but it's nothing like, pop music or something. And so that was where really a lot of the difficulty came for me. I was actually very happy. I can be very content without a lot. I did struggle to find women that felt the same way. And so I burned through 2 marriages in my 20s, being married to women who, at the end of the day, they basically, I mean, every marriage has its own flavor of dysfunction if it goes that way. But fundamentally, they both were like, I don't want to be hitched my wagon to this guy for the rest of my life. He's an artist. He's a renegade. He's clearly never, even if he was living under a bridge, he would never acquiesce to getting a job. Like, I'm not going to put all my eggs in this basket of this marriage. And so that was the tension, right? And then I sort of got conflicted in my mind, and I started to trying to kind of have my cake and eat it too, where I'm an artist and a student. I was able to get in, even though I dropped out of high school, I was able to get into college. And so I was going to college on a music scholarship. But then at the same time, I was like, well, I really do want to make money and I really do want to have a nice life, because even if that's not important to me, what is important to me is going to be unlocked by being able to provide, right? And so my solution for that, which frankly turned out to be right, although I didn't understand it very well at the time, was actually entrepreneurship. Because a lot of my best gigs as a piano player were playing private parties and dinner parties and charity functions and galas and benefits and whatnot for very, very wealthy people who would hire piano players to come, serenade their dinner parties or whatever. And those were the best gigs. They paid the best and they were in the nicest houses and I got to play the nicest pianos. And most of those clients were entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. They were people that had businesses and they were hiring me to come play their company party or whatever. So I sort of connected. Entrepreneurs are they get the best of both worlds. They have the freedom. They have, they get to be creative. Maybe it's a little different. Maybe it's value creation versus artistic creation, but it's still creation. And they have, they know how their rent's going to be paid at the end of the month, or even better, they might own their home outright, and so during my 20s, I was kind of artist by night, aspiring entrepreneur by day. Once I kind of got to my mid 20s, and I started and failed at a bunch of different businesses. And that's what ended up bringing my life to a point of crisis, is that by my late 20s, I had attempted to start, I guess I did start, but then shortly after I closed down, a pair of franchise restaurants that I financed through the Small Business Administration here in the United States, which it sounds nice. I mean, the brochure for the SBA is kind of, it has a pleasant looking person on the front of the brochure. But the reality is, it's a freaking wolf behind it with fangs called the U.S. Treasury. And when you default on an SBA loan in the United States, the U.S. Treasury, it's no different than owing taxes.
Wow.
The U.S. Treasury comes at you hard. And so I found myself at 29 years old, I had defaulted on 2 SBA loans, or I guess it was technically 1 SBA loan for 2 restaurants. And between that and some legal debts and some real estate debts that was all related to the restaurants, I owed like $500,000. And I had the government coming after me. And so I basically, anyway, that was when I had to really pivot fully into entrepreneurship and try to figure out something that I could commit myself to full-time, make a real living. Because now it wasn't just, I need my $40,000 a year to live, or maybe 80 if I want to have a family, or 100. Now I also have $500,000 in debt I have to pay off to get the government to leave me alone. And that's what pivoted me into what's ultimately led to what I do now. So,
Jeff, when I'm listening to that, you're talking about it like I talk about some of my past failures, and it's almost like looking back, it was almost a good thing because you needed that crisis in order to grow, right? To be the man you are today. But putting yourself back, you said you had a failed marriage, you had all this debt, you were 29, so still, it's almost like a early midlife crisis. Were you very depressed at the time, or did you have the perspective that this is just another challenge that I'm going to figure out? Because it seems like from a very young age, you had I don't want to call it an old soul, but you had a very mature sense of self, and I'm not going to just be trapped into what society expects me to. Like, I think it takes a lot of courage to drop out of high school and follow your dreams as a musician, jazz, especially like you said, a niche jazz musician. So it sounds like you had a lot of character as a young man, which is unusual. Did you have that perspective when you were at that point in your late 20s, or were you pretty depressed?
I was depressed, but I wasn't depressed because I was in debt. I was depressed because I just got divorced for the second time. I've learned about myself that, like money, material stuff, like most of the things that I think a lot of people stress about in life, it doesn't get to me. I can look at my life and see that there were times, I'm probably the happiest I've ever been now. So I don't want to say the happiest times of my life. I mean, I like to say I like to think that I'm in the process every day of creating the next happiest time of my life. But I can look back on my life and recognize that there is no direct correlation between feeling fulfilled. I actually don't really like the term happy. It's kind of flimsy for my taste, but like that deep soul enrichment and fulfillment that comes from like, I'm living a life well, never really correlated to money in the sense of material things. Obviously, money creates a lot of options, but as a jazz musician, I wasn't sitting around going, "Oh, I wish I had more options," because I expressed my need for optionality through music. Literally every single note a jazz musician plays is a free creative choice. So like I was optioning myself all over the place. Like I didn't long for that like most people do. A lot of people feel stuck or like in a rut and they're longing for options. So I never had that like lust for options, which meant I didn't really need money. But what can get to me, what does bring me down, is more in like the romantic relationship aspect of life. Like not to be, sentimental here, but like I love love. And it makes me really sad when it goes away. And so that was my depression. I was overweight. I was depressed. I wasn't going out, but I was under $500,000 in debt. And most people would assume I was that way because of the debt. It wasn't. It was because of the divorce.
Gotcha. Okay. And then looking back now, do you think it sounds like I can only imagine the attraction of a young musician like you for your ex-wife. You said 2 failed marriages, but I can also understand that initially that was very attractive, and then most women want to look forward to a future of stability and wealth. So it sounds like that was the big stumbling. Look, was there any other lessons in those 2 failed marriages that that's helped you be successful today in your marriage as a family man, or was was that the biggest thing? It's just your lack of stability?
No, I mean, the lack of stability was the fundamental problem, but there were a lot of layers on top of it that I mean, now I'm a big, like, I'm really into, kind of the extreme ownership concept. And like, it's all, I approach marriage or any type of partnership or really any endeavor as whether, to the extent that it's true or not, I don't really care. It's more effective to act as if everything is entirely up to me. Right. And somebody could always come out and come point out and be like, well, that you couldn't have controlled that thing. Yeah, but I'll in the grand scheme, I'll have better outcomes if I act as if that everything's up to me. And then there's self-efficacy of like, okay, well, which things am I going to focus my energy on and which things am I not? Because I don't actually have the ability to control them. But I'm certainly not going to impart the control of them to anybody else so that later, if it doesn't work, I'm blaming or I'm a victim or any of that. But that's me now. At the time, I was a neurotic, psychologically knotted mess. I mean, I've done so much therapy now, I can look back and say, geez, I wouldn't have wished a marriage to me on anyone, even my 2 ex-wives who I don't particularly care for. I still wouldn't have wished it on them because I was such a mess. But
God, I'm so glad you said what you just said is so powerful. The idea of extreme ownership, even when things are out of your control, having that mindset only helps you. And I think that's a huge thing we're seeing in society now, where so many people, it's like the race to the bottom of their misfortunes. And even if there's validation in their misfortunes, it doesn't help them having that mindset. So my God, that was such music to my ears. And I love what you said about you went through a lot of therapy and you've evolved so much since then, because I always thought I had a pretty decent upbringing, and everyone has issues from their past they have to deal with, but I didn't think mine were anything bad. But having my wife's a therapist and having talked to her about a lot of things over the last 7 years, I've realized that therapy is it's so important. And when I look back to my past life as a professional fighter, like I worked so much on my physical attributes and my mindset in terms of determination, but I wasn't very, like, I could have done so much more with my mind, in the sense of doing things like the mental training and visualization and all these other things. The mind is just so powerful. And it does seem like in most people's trajectory of life or the arc of life, it takes us a long time to figure out how to control the mind. And I think that's such a gift. The idea of therapy being, it's almost like the positive psychology approach to, instead of taking a person who's a complete mess and getting them to average, any person who's doing okay, they're average in many ways, with the right therapy and with the right mindset training, that's going to unlock greatness. And it's something that I've really changed my mind on. Because there was part of me when I was young was like, oh, if you see a therapist, you're soft. But it's like,
right,
it just gives you these different perspectives to see life. So I'd love to talk a lot. We're not even getting around to what we're going to talk about, like all the things you're doing now in your mindset. Because I just find you're so much of your past so interesting, because it seems like going through all that therapy unlocked a lot of things. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things, the big lessons you got, the big paradigm shifts from therapy?
Yeah, I mean, man, therapy changed everything for me and for my marriage, my third and presumably final marriage. I mean, we went to therapy together, my wife and I. And by the way, I love that you mentioned positive psychology. I'm a overt fan, and I would say dilettante, but maybe a little more than that, in positive psychology and the work of Martin Seligman and learned optimism and like, beyond just like, oh, that's a nice idea and I like it. I mean, I'm pretty serious. I've studied it and I apply it and I'm intentional about it, and I work it into exercises that I do with people in some of my events. And I love the school of positive psychology. So we can circle back to that as much as you want. And I did not, my therapist was not manifestly a positive psychologist, but that was one of the modalities that he brought in. In general, it was under the umbrella of cognitive behavioral therapy, the CBT, which is sort of a meta modality. That's a set of modalities. But therapy just did so much for me. And fundamentally, the biggest thing that I think it did was it helped me understand the term I use is cognitive distortions, which is a term by David Burns, who's a psychologist at Stanford. And that's his term. And it's sort of anchored to, like, there's some Jungian, metaphysical approach. There's the Adlerian school. Like, I'm a big nerd on psychology. I'll warn you. But using myself as a laboratory in which to learn and apply. So it's all applied psychology. It's not academic. But the biggest thing for me is just learning the distortions in the way that I think. Talking about Seligman has something he calls the 3 Ps of pessimism, right? Which are, what is it? There's pervasiveness, which is a cognitive error of attribution of size. There's personalization, which is a cognitive error of attribution of blame. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the 3rd P: personalization, pervasiveness, and permanence, which is an error of duration. Like, my life sucks. It's never going to get better. Like, it's a permanently bad situation, right? That would be a cognitive error of permanence. And then Burns has all these, like, more specialized kind of granular cognitive distortions. But, like, the more you get into this stuff, the more you realize that your mind, it can be your greatest asset. But if you don't understand it and you have emotional trauma that's buried way deeper than your cerebrum or your cortex, where you have access to consciousness and sort of memories and ideas and thoughts and words and images, like, below that, all this stuff is buried in the cerebellum and the limbic system, and that stuff essentially causes the way you think to be constantly misfiring. And if you haven't dredged that stuff up and worked on it, and not just revisited it, but reprocessed it, recontextualized it, assigned new meanings to the things that happen to you, then your mind actually probably isn't your greatest asset. It's probably a weapon that's working against you. And that's a lot. By the way, I just described it in a few minutes. I mean, it takes years to do the work.
Oh, 100%. And Jeff, for people that are listening that aren't familiar, so Authentic Happiness was the first, I think it was one of his big bestsellers. Maybe Martin Seligman wrote other books before and he's written books since. But that book really changed my life. I remember my older brother gave it to me and I was on vacation in Dominican Republic and I had a fight with my ex-girlfriend and she just went off a deer on a thing. And I remember I just went somewhere warm with it and I was reading it and I was drinking an iced coffee or something. And I was like, oh my God, this book is it's incredible. And he talked about this idea of we all have these signature strengths. And he had this test that you can do. And I think it was 250 questions and you answer them on a scale. And then it comes, when you finished, your top 5 signature strengths. And the idea is if you can try to build these into your life as much as possible, ideally with your career, but if not your career, maybe with your hobbies or your side hustle or your passions, then you're going to be really happy. And I got to share something with you, Jeff. It's so interesting. So I took this I'm 44. I took this at 24. And I remember my number 1 signature strength was perseverance. I think number 2 was curiosity and love of learning. 3 was like dedication. It was all things for when I look back at my younger self, like I was so driven. Just started my trading company. I just think I was trying to win the Chicago Golden Gloves and I was getting into combat sports. And I was just so focused. Ideally, I wanted a family one day, but I couldn't even think about that. I was just so focused on trying to fulfill my potential in these areas. And then I was so curious. I took it a couple of months ago. I was like, I've got to take this test and see where I'm at. And perseverance wasn't even one of the top 5. And I think I'm still driven and persevere, but I'm at a really good state. I have a 3-year-old son and I'm a great marriage. And I just moved to a house from the city of Chicago, an hour south in Northwest Indiana on 8 acres. And it's just been so nice to get out of the city. And the number 1 signature strength, Jeff, was love. And I was floored. That wasn't even in my top 5 back. So, and I'm so happy. I'm happy that I've evolved, but I'm happy I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago. But it was just, I was blown away by that. I was like, wow, that's pretty wild.
That's super cool. Yeah, it is interesting how we change. Uh, but I think it's also, there's a little bit of a false security or potential for false security in that we only change over the course of a life if we're intentionally oriented towards growth on a consistent basis. I mean, not everybody that takes I haven't taken Seligman's assessment, but I've taken something multiple times called the Taylor-Johnson assessment, which is it's similar. It's like it works on polarities, right? This versus that. Like there's selfishness versus like charitability, and then there's 8 different polarities. And I've taken that multiple times, and every 5 years I'm sort of a somewhat new person. But there's also people that can take that either one of these assessments 30 years later, and nothing's changed.
Right.
It's you can't choose to change in a moment, but you can choose to live in a state of openness and self-reflection, and not from ego, that makes it so there's a natural change that happens over time. But like it takes a real commitment in a sort of intention.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the goal should be to change. That's one thing that I really struggled with when I was retiring from combat sports. Was there was part of me that was really struggling to let that identity go, and I was still competing in jiu-jitsu. They have divisions in jiu-jitsu where you can be over 40 and compete with people over 40, and I was doing these competitions, and I really enjoyed the challenge of it and the goal setting, and just the lifestyle of trying to. It made me more focused in my diet and my recovery and my exercise, and I really enjoyed it. But then I realized, I don't want to be doing the same thing at 60 that I was doing at 20. Like at some point, you have to let things go, and in order to evolve. And but it's something that I always thought. I always had so many interests when I was fighting. I was like, oh, I'm not going to be like these guys when they're retired, that they struggle and they turn to alcohol or overeating or whatever, drugs, whatever the things are. And it wasn't easy for me either. I think anytime we let go of an identity, it's difficult. But Jeff, can we go back? So you're late 20s, you've got all this debt. I think it seems like you're doing really, really well right now. In your bio, you've had some crazy sales numbers, which is amazing. And now you're mentoring other people. And I can tell, you can tell there's people that are in sales that are teaching other people because they couldn't actually make it. And I can tell, and I know the numbers speak for themselves, but I can tell right off the bat, you're real, and you're really good at what you do, and you've obviously been through a lot, and you've come out the other side a much more evolved person. So can you take us back to how you rebuilt yourself from that low?
Yeah, of course. So okay. So I'll try to keep it somewhat in sequence. I mean, yeah. So I kind of had this nadir of pain, right? At 29 years old, I'm $495,000 in debt, hiding from the government. I'm heading towards my second divorce. I lost my apartment, which was actually, I say I lost my apartment because, it's easier than explaining, but basically I co-owned a duplex with a friend of mine. He lived upstairs. I lived downstairs. I lived downstairs with my wife. I could no longer afford my half of that. So I ended up losing my equity, losing my share of the property, giving it to him, having to moved in with her parents, even though we were estranged, and she didn't actually, it was like, well, either she can move home and Jeff can live on the street, or my in-laws were like, or we'll let them both move here, even though, we don't know how this is going to go. And so I spent the better part of a year. Like I mentioned, I was pretty depressed, but again, because of the divorce or the separation at that time. I gained weight. I never left the house. I had also started to develop arthritis in my wrist. So even my piano playing was like, it wasn't like I couldn't go back to playing 8 or 10 gigs a week like I had before. So I just sort of got to work. I went online, and I remember, so actually back then, in Gmail, in the Gmail platform where a lot of people have their emails, Google used to run ads in Gmail. And actually, maybe they still do. I don't know, because I use their business apps. Like I have a Google business account, so they don't run ads in the business accounts. And as an entrepreneur, I've had Google business apps for 15 years now. But at least at the time, I was in my personal email, and I clicked on an ad that was like how to make money on the internet kind of thing. And I started getting targeted with ads because the internet figured out, even the early algorithms of 2008 were able to figure out that I was a broken and, somewhat potentially desperate person. So I started getting all these ads about how to make money. And I ended up going through a training program at the time that taught me a skill known as affiliate marketing, which is a subset of digital marketing. And digital marketing's evolved a lot in the last 15 years. But basically, it was like how to get people to buy stuff with links from other companies, to buy other companies' products off of links. And when people buy, whatever product from whatever company, that company pays you a little commission because it's all tracked through the link. Like, for example, Amazon is the biggest affiliate program in the world. Anybody can go sign up as a free affiliate on Amazon. And then I could send you, Lawrence, I could send you a link from Amazon and be like, oh, check out these, nunchucks. And if I grab my affiliate link and you go buy nunchucks from Amazon, they'll send me 50 cents or something, right? So that's affiliate marketing in a nutshell. It's just referrals through links. And I learned how to do that. And I was obsessed, right? I mean, I was working on this 14, 16 hours a day. It was actually funny because I was like this. I was almost like my poor former in-laws. They basically had like a homeless person living upstairs because I stopped showering. I would just live in a bathrobe and my slippers because I was just on the internet all day, every day, or all night. I'd sleep a few hours in the middle of the day, just trying to learn how to make money on the internet so I could pay off this debt, get divorced or not, either way, get that chapter closed, move out of the house and have a life again. And it took about 18 months, but I actually was able to pay off $495,000 in total debts in 18 months, working on a laptop in a spare bedroom at my former in-laws' house, who thought that I was just upstairs, looking at porn or being a broke loser or doing whatever broke losers do in their, when they're squatting in other people's houses. No. I was wiping out $500,000 in debt so that I could emerge victorious and say, okay, I'm, and I remember I said to my ex-wife or soon to be ex-wife at the time, hey, I cleared the debt. I won. We have a new opportunity, a new beginning. And she was too traumatized and she wasn't willing to sign up for another round. So we did end up concluding the divorce, and I moved out and moved on and actually moved to New York City and, kind of pivoted into the next phase of my life.
Jeff, that's amazing. So in 18 months to make that much money as a relatively, it's not like your experience that you were learning as you were going. It sounds like, I mean, that's amazing. How much when I see a lot of those ads, I'm always, I've never really been in that world, like online sales, but for me, so much of it, I'm sure there's some legitimate courses that work, but I'm sure there's a lot of bullshit that you have to wade through too. How much of it was legitimate? Because it sounds like you said 18 hours a day. It sounds like that there's obviously methods to it, and you have to do a lot of work, and you can make a lot of money in a short time. And that's exactly what you did. How much was trial and error of you trying to do things that were just people trying to sell courses that didn't really work? And how much was it just, it all works if you put the work in, if that makes sense? I
got really lucky. Although luck is when opportunity meets preparation. So I'll take some credit, but the very first course I bought was legit, and it was the only one I bought. Now I looked at a lot of them, but again, I say lucky. I followed in fact, I'll tell you how I got lucky. I would say the word is serendipity. So the program that I ended up investing in, which was $395, which was a lot of money to a broke musician who can't even work, can't even play music, and but also when you're $500,000 in debt, what's $400, yes. Right? So, but this is crazy. So the program that I found, and they're all the same. And frankly, I run an entrepreneurial education company now called Entre Institute that's had 270,000 students or whatever. And it's still like I'm not that different, right? There's going to be a guy on the internet who's got some story of how, entrepreneurship or this or that type of business or online business or, whatever there's always this this archetypal rags to riches hero's journey that you're meant to, believe in and then go, oh, well, if they can do it, I can do it too. And then And so now it's ironic now because I'm sort of that guy to like a lot of people in the world. But at the time, that guy to me was a guy named Jay. And I found this guy Jay on the internet. And Jay's story was, I used to be a muffler salesman in Kansas. And I hated my life, and I was always working on, getting yelled at by my boss, or I don't know, whatever his drama was. And then I started doing affiliate marketing, and next thing I knew, I was making $100,000 a month, and I quit my job and blah, blah, blah. So it turned out that he had this old picture of himself back when he used to sell mufflers. And I could see in the background that it was a Midas shop, like Midas mufflers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute, Midas in Kansas? I used to have this company, this business I started with a buddy of mine. I was a piano player. He was a bartender. We would sit up late at night at his bar and talk and hatch entrepreneurial ideas. And so like probably 5 or 6 years before this had happened, that guy and I had started a company where we would go into college towns and we would try to sell this little advertising product, these cards that had coupons for college students. And anyway, the details don't matter. But what's crazy is that the guy that owned at least some of the Midas franchises in Kansas was one of our clients.
Wow.
So, because two of our markets were University of Kansas in Lawrence and Kansas State in Manhattan, Kansas. So I literally was able to call up this guy that used to buy advertising from me and be like, hey, did you ever have a guy named Jay that worked at one of your shops and got rich, and now he's like on the internet telling his story and talking about how much it sucked to work at Midas? And he's like, oh yeah, that guy, you're the third person that's called me in the last 3 years to ask me that or something. And so I was able to verify that this person actually was who he said he was, because I happened to have a random connection. That's the serendipity. But then here's the flip side of that. So that platform, that program, and by the way, I did well enough in that program in a year and a half that a year and a half after I first joined, Jay ended up calling me. And he heard that I was moving to New York because I was on his radar. I was like one of their top best students ever. And he ended up asking me to come take over and run operations for his company. It's the closest thing I've ever had to a real job was working 3 days a week as an in-house operations consultant for him on this same platform that had quote, saved my life. But what was, I got a little bit twisted on what I was saying or where I was going with that. But But so then now I was on the inside. So I actually can tell you how many students they had, how many of them actually, not necessarily how many made money, because you can't see people's merchant accounts or whatever, but how many people responded to surveys or gave testimonials that were validated that they actually had made money. And this is where it gets kind of dark. This platform had over 40,000 people, 40,000 students that had gone through this training. And I bet you less than 100 made any reasonable amount of money. Wow. I mean, I'm talking way less than 1%. And in terms of making enough money to like live a good life, you probably count it maybe on two hands, maybe less than 20 people. And so so let me tell you, I found out I was one of the probably top 3 to 5 students that this platform ever had. Now, what was different about me than 39,990 other students? Because it's affiliate marketing, it's the same for everybody. There's no magic formulas. It was just work ethic. It was just the fact that I was willing to keep beating my head against the wall until either my skull or the wall broke.
Well, I'm so glad you said that. You highlighted that because I was just about to say the same thing. There's so many times that I can look back to things in my life that I'm happy about, and it was always preceded by an ungodly amount of really hard work. And it's just, there's something in today's society with the Instagram culture and young kids in front of Lamborghinis and the crypto culture. And there is stories about people that just hit it out the park really easily, but they're just so few and far between. And there's such a huge amount of people that look to those stories hoping that they're going to be one of them without realizing that the opportunity is there. But it's sort of, what is the Mark Twain quote? Somebody stressed up in overalls and hard work or something. We all have the opportunity, but it's not the Lamborghini in your driveway. It's the rolling up your sleeves and just getting down and dirty and putting the work in. So I'm so glad you said that. Well, one thing I know now when you're coaching, one of the topics you're passionate about talking about, and I'd love to explore because I couldn't agree more, is about how marriage can amplify your business. And I don't know how much you're hearing about this, but I seem to be hearing from a lot of credible sources about, and even just seeing some of my friends, some of my wife's friends, there's a lot of people that they say they want what we have, a good marriage and a family, but for whatever reason, they just can't see it. And then there's a huge amount of people, I think they're called incels, where they're almost prideful in the fact that they're single, and they try and pretend they're happy, but all the statistics are showing that they're actually very unhappy. So it seems to be a very difficult time for younger people who are looking for what we have, a good marriage and a soulmate. So I'd love to talk a little bit about, maybe how to attract the partner that you're compatible with and you can grow with, and also why, because I couldn't agree more, but I'd love to hear your views on why marriage is good for business.
Yeah, I'm passionate about that very much. And, there's another thing I was literally just reading about yesterday, because the dating apps are starting to have a problem because they're being overrun with what they call, I think it's called ENMs, which is ethical non-monogamists. So they're basically people going on the dating app saying, I'm looking for a date. I might even be looking for love. I'm just not looking for it with only one person. Right. And now it's like creating this, most people are on dating apps with the idea that you just described. Like I have a picture of finding the one. Now they're being overrun that are people like, well, I'm just trying to find one of the 12 or whatever they're after. And so, yeah, I think that, the human mind, like I was saying, it's an asset if you have it harnessed, understood, and to some degree sanitized. It's a liability in the absence of any of those other things being very intentionally true and validated to yourself repeatedly through consistency over time. Mm. And so I think there's a lot of what's happening in the mind or the psyche of, or the zeitgeist of the world, is that they're bumping up against challenges in traditional structures. And so then there's this, sort of psychological divergence happening where they're convincing themselves that the structure itself is the problem or is undesirable, right? It's like, because it's getting harder and harder to economically, socially, emotionally, and beyond have what you're describing, well, my mind is going to let me off the hook by convincing me that I don't really want that. So I don't have to live under a constant feeling of futility or frustration. And the mind is a self-preservation mechanism. Like the first 10 functions of the mind are just to keep you alive and keep you from getting so unhappy that you become destructive to yourself, right? Mm. And so the mind will convince, at some point, if my life is difficult enough, the mind will convince me that what I really want is to be surrounded by, frogs, because I happen to have an abundant supply of frogs and women are scarce, right? Like the mind will get you to where you need to be so that you can tolerate your reality. And the reality is, like you said, the data, unlike the mind, which will lie to us, the data doesn't. And even beyond the data, I mean, I think about those moments when I'm together with my wife, not in any, lewd sense, but just like holding her or feeling connected through passion and purpose and family. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Those moments where I don't give a shit who presents me with what data. That is the pinnacle of our corporeal existence. If there's something better than that, I'm going to have to die to experience it. I know that. And so, but it's to a lot of people, that sounds like a chimera. It's a thing that, theoretically may exist, but they don't see how they could ever achieve it. Here's my key. I mean, now with 2 gone wrong and 1 going well, I have a little bit of data to report from. I think the reason my marriage now is so strong is there's a few reasons. One, we came together. We've both been through enough crap that we had gotten rid of all of the fairy tale notions. And we were coming together because we wanted a partner in growth. We just wanted to lock arms and say, hey, let's grow together. Because 1 + 1, I think, could potentially equal more than 2, but we got to really, really work on the ones. But let's do that together. And so, I mean, within months of getting together, we were going to therapy. She had kids and I was coming in as I'd never had kids. And so, there was no other father figure in the picture. So it was, some of it was like, hey, I want to learn to be a better father, how to integrate with kids that are, exposed to, oh, mom's boyfriend is now living with us. And like, what is, so there was, how to navigate this more like all the permutations of the interpersonal relationship dynamics in a blended family. But basically we just at a very early in our coupleship, I don't know that we declared it from the outset. It kind of just, we both figured out that that's what we were each really looking for, was someone that we could lock arms with and grow and support each other in becoming our best selves. Now, it was really gnarly there for a while, and in the interest of time, I won't go through all the ups and downs. But I think that's first and foremost what we offer each other is there is someone in my life who is more attached to me becoming the best version of myself than she is attached to her own comfort. Because it's uncomfortable when the people around us change, right? And it can only work if both parties are aligned in that regard. Because I am also standing here much more attached to her growth and unlocking of her full potential than I am of her to stay the same, or the way that it would be comfortable for me if she would just like stay as she is. Honestly, I don't even know if I have a number two. I think that's it, but it's hard to find that. And I would say in our case, it took two people that had both been through a lot of other stuff that wasn't that to finally realize that that's what we were really looking for.
Jeff, I've noticed something with a lot of men, I guess from their late 20s onwards, that aren't in relationships. They have a mentality, and I definitely saw a bit of this in me. I had the mentality that I wanted to win the game of money first and put myself in a good position where I had freedom and I was my own man. Then I wanted to win the game of personal, facing my fears in combat sports. And fulfilling my athletic potential. And then I was thinking in my head, okay, once I've done all that, then I'll be ready to the next chapter to be open to building a relationship with somebody. And luckily it happened that I did meet my wife when I'd done those things. But I always think I would have been so much successful in both those endeavors if I was with her younger. And so there's this idea with a lot of men that I see, or that I notice, where they want to almost tick the box of success before, and then they'll be ready to attract the partner of their dreams. But I think from what your message is, and I think from my experience too, is you can go a lot further with the right partner in your life during the journey. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, our lives are a product of our agreements. It's like, we've all agreed to some things in our lives, and those agreements that we consistently maintain eventually become our entire life. Some people have agreed that, they're gonna hook up late at the club with, whatever person presents that is the optimized combination of attractive and drunk. Some people have agreed that, they're going to make $1 billion. They've made that commitment or that agreement with themselves, or get rich or die trying, right? Like 50 Cent said. Or we're just a product of our agreements. But there's second order and third order consequences to agreements, right? It's like, if I agree to this, first of all, every agreement is also an agreement not to agree to anything else that would have to occupy the same space. And then there's the things that ensue from there. And I think that when you look at the second and third order consequences of the fundamental agreements of a psychologically healthy marriage, which is tragically a probably somewhat small subset of all marriages, because we don't teach kids this stuff. We don't, but I don't know why we aren't teaching kids about like the stages of psychosocial development, so that at least when they're getting bullied or picked on, they can go like, oh, well, I can see that guy's working out his, industry versus inferiority conflict. And, it sucks for me today, but that's okay. Cause eventually I'll escalate to identity versus role confusion. And then I'll navigate my social peer groups for that purpose. And like kids, why don't we teach kids the shit that actually helps them understand themselves in the context of their own life? Why are we teaching them the history of the Peloponnesian War? Right. And so, if you find two people like that, and then you say, okay, what are the things that are going to sort of naturally ensue from this? Other than probably a healthy spiritual orientation that gives us sort of like existential peace, which is, again, that's just another agreement. That's just another relationship with something supernatural. I don't think next to a good, healthy, psychologically well-adjusted marriage, there's anything else that's like, I'm a probabilist, right? I'm always just trying to calculate what are the probabilities that I'm setting in motion for my life. I can't solve for anything that, based on both logic and observation, is more likely to produce a set of conditions in which I love my life than to work out a good marriage.
I love that you talked about agreements, and every time you agree to something, you're also, even if you're not stating it, you're agreeing to not doing a lot of things. That's so true. So many people can't see that every time they say yes to something, they're saying no to other things. And I just love that Thomas Sowell idea of there's no perfect solutions, there's only trade-offs, and that you completely highlight that. What do you think when I know unlock your potential is a big theme in your work? What do you think is the biggest roadblocks that you're seeing when you're mentoring and helping people, why they're not unlocking that potential? Is there anything like the same kind of themes, or is it everyone's kind of got their own unique things they're working through? Or is there some things that you can share that maybe might help people listening?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this may be a tad bit reductive to say, because there's so many different facets of it, and it presents like nothing is as simple as the answer to a question. But
yes,
in general, I think that just as a society and as a culture, we really are losing. We're not just losing our sense of or our delayed gratification tolerance. I think we're also losing, and I think these go together. It's like our timelines for gratification are shortening and shortening and shortening, because honestly, part of it is we struggle to pay attention to things long enough to reach gratification if the gratification is too delayed, because our attention windows are getting distorted. But also, I mean, this sort of like dopaminergic obsession we have as a culture now, where, and again, it's the mind and the neurochemistry are just two sides of the same coin. Like, we're training ourselves to be bad at following through and to want things right now, because of mostly the way we consume media, but also what we've accepted as normal in relationships, right? Like, it's pretty rare that, we do anything for 5 or 6 hours other than chase money, honestly. Never mind sit and, what most people listening, when's the last time you went and spent 4 hours watching a really good play? Something that doesn't have all the CGI and all the sound effects and all the adrenaline and all the dopamine stimulation, just watching a really good play that has interesting themes. And then you spent 4 hours processing and reflecting with somebody else that saw it with you. Like, we just kind of, if you invited a girl to go on a date now, and that's what you proposed, hey, I'd like to go see a play and I'd like to spend a few hours talking about it. Right? Like, they're gonna go on whatever, crowdsource mechanism there is now for giving, dating quality feedback, and be like, this guy's the biggest loser ever. Nobody should go out with him. And now I'm going to have to shut my whole profile down. Right? Like, it's sad. It really is sad. But so there's the delayed gratification, but then beyond that, and that's why guys like you and me, what I mean is, I think everybody should strive to be of this nature, meaning there is something in my life that I have built proficiency at that wasn't about chasing money, that I could only build that proficiency with thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of intentional, focused work that required me to be at a place in my own consciousness where I blocked everything else out. Mm-hmm. And to cultivate that space in which to operate over extremely long periods of time. I think if you're not actively building that muscle, like for me, it's piano. For you, it's martial arts. In this world, though, if you're not actively building that muscle, the rest of the world is actively trying to atrophy that muscle. Because you're a better cog in the world's machine if you don't have that ability.
And listening to your story about why you were one of, say 10 out of 40,000 that put the work in, I would trace it back, without knowing you too well, to your teenage self investing years and years of hard work to become a master musician. And it's that same mindset. And that's one of the things that, as a new dad, I can't wait to teach my son is mastery in something. So for him, I'm hoping it's going to be jujitsu as one of the things that he gets into in a few years. Mastery of jujitsu as the example, he's going to take that mindset. I can put a decade of hard work into a skill to get really proficient. And now I have that growth mindset. And now I can take that to business. I can take that to my relationship. I can take that to any altruistic cause I want to do. I can take it to almost anywhere, but it's that same mindset. But in order to have the confidence, I remember when I was a new boxer and I was reading these books on mindset, and I was like, how do I develop a winning mentality? And I remember reading this one guy, and he was saying, okay, you develop a winning mentality by winning. And I was like, yeah, but I'm just starting out. I haven't really won very much. Like, how do I get it? And then it was like, okay, then I'm gonna start winning rounds in the gym, and then I'm gonna take that, and then I'm gonna win rounds in a real fight, and then I'm gonna take that. It's going to build on itself, but you have to start somewhere. And for me, the somewhere is just hard work in any endeavor. And then as soon as you start to see improvement, you can take that, okay, hard work equals improvement. Listen, life isn't fair. There's people that are way more gifted in anything you do that they're going to get much better, much quicker, but there's still a direct correlation between effort and results.
Yeah, I mean, amen to that. I mean, confidence, and Ed Milet taught me this. I had him on the podcast and on my podcast, and he said this, and it's potentially the single most memorable thing that anyone on one of my episodes has ever said to me, is that confidence comes from proving to yourself over time that when you tell yourself you'll do something, you will. And just building up that library, that history of experience. It's like, damn it, when I say I'm going to do something, I don't have to tell anybody else, because it was enough that I told it to myself. And I've experienced, when you have a streak of 7,000 consecutive kept commitments, it's pretty likely you're not going to fumble it on 7,001. We talk about like on Snapchat, oh, I got to snap my friend back for my 13th day in a row. What about keeping that commitment you made to yourself for the 13,000th time in a row?
Mm.
And then so to circle back to the dopamine thing I was talking about in the delayed gratification, here's why it's so tragic that we've lost our ability, or that we're losing our ability. I don't want to be binary. We are losing. Our generalized ability to tolerate delayed gratification is diminishing over time. It would seem there. That's a cognitively undistorted way of saying what I'm trying to say. When you aren't willing to delay gratification for very long stretches of time, you never get the opportunity to learn the joy of process and progress. Because when you first start to delay gratification, it's still about the end result in the delay gratification. Oh, it's going to take 5 years. It's going to be a slog. I'm really signing up for a long haul here. But then you get a few months into it and you realize how excited you are over some tiny little bit of progress you just made. Like I took jujitsu for a little while. I had bad shoulders. It wasn't for me. But like, I remember when I hung in there with someone that I knew was a better athlete than me. Mm. I didn't win. I just didn't get my ass kicked for like 10 minutes. I was so flippin' excited. And this guy was so pissed because he, took one look at him and one look at me, and he should have beat, he looked like somebody that would beat me, but I was able to just hang on for dear life for 10 minutes before they called it. And I was so excited. I was by no means some jujitsu master, but I had made a little bit of progress. But if you never strive for anything that's a long ways out, then you never get all those little incremental wins that you start to realize the end result actually never even mattered. It was the process is where all the joy lived.
I mean, I couldn't agree more, Jeff. And what you said about being someone that keeps commitments to himself, I'm sorry if someone heard me talk about this before, because I was just talking a couple of episodes ago about this. Sorry for the repetition, but that's one of the reasons why sometimes I'll run at 1 a.m. And I'm a night owl anyway, so it's not too crazy. But if my day got away from me and I was supposed to train and for whatever reason I missed an appointment or something, it's probably better for me to get a good night's sleep for my health, physical health. But for my mindset, I have to do it. Just because of what you said, I want to be a person that it was on my schedule for today, and I wanted to do it. So it's just, Jeff, I had high expectations on your bio, but you've exceeded them. You're a real deep thinker, and you're a real So many things I'm going to bug you in a few months to do part two, because I really want to talk to you about some other things. But I know we're a little short on time. If people want to find out more about your podcast and your work and your courses, and they want to unlock their own potential, what's the best place they should find you?
I'm grateful you asked. Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you type in Jeff Lerner, I tend to pop up. I've invested a little more energy into making myself searchable than I guess any other Jeff Lerners in the world. But I have a YouTube channel where I give a lot. I think I have close to 1,000 or maybe over 1,000 videos. Obviously, there's no cost for any of that. I have a book. If you're watching this on video, you can see behind me my book, Unlock Your Potential, which hit number 2 on the nonfiction bestseller list, but I never got it to number 1. Freaking James Clear with Atomic Habits, man. He's like still up there. He's been there for like 5 years. But anyway, it was a best-selling book. And honestly, I'm pretty proud of it. I wouldn't say like I worked but talking about delayed gratification, I didn't work nonstop for 4 years, but it was like a 4-year effort to write the book. Unlock Your Potential is the name of the book. I have a podcast by the same name. And I mentioned earlier, I have a platform called Entre Institute, which isn't for everyone, but I would say if you're hearing these ideas and you're like, man, I don't feel 100% fulfilled in my life, or particularly if you feel like there's any sort of a schism or a bifurcation in your life where it's like I'm one person when I go to work and I make money and I just sort of endure my professional life because it's what I got to do. But then I go home and my personal life, or maybe you love your professional life, but you don't love your personal life, or maybe you love your personal life, but you don't love your professional life, or maybe you like them both, but they just don't seem to integrate very well. Like what Entre Institute, on the surface, it's a platform around teaching entrepreneurship, but really what it is how to build the skill set that allows you to live a completely integrated life so that your life can be a circle rather than a fork in the road, so to speak. So
that idea of integration is so important, because that's what I see with people that chase money at the expense of everything else. And for me, maybe it's greedy, but I want to have my health, and I want to have money, and I want to have a rich social network, and I want to have a good relationship with my family. I want it all, and I'll take a bit less in all of them to have all of them, as opposed to extreme success in just one avenue at the expense of everything else. So that's why I think you resonate so much with me, is because you've come to the same conclusions as well. And we're both striving for a lot more than just success and money, but that's still a part of what, of course, you're going for. But there's all these other things as well that are as, or if not more important.
Amen to that. And they all make each other better too.
Yes, exactly.
So that's the thing. Like you can have, I mean, theory, and there is. I mean, if you look at the data, go Google the Deaton Kahneman study in 2009 out of Princeton, and really dig into the data, not the data they talk about, but the real data at the core of the study. There is something called a life satisfaction index that directly correlates to wealth. So in theory, a billionaire is happier than a 100-millionaire, because it just keeps going. Because honestly, more money equals more options to make the world reflect you back to yourself. And that feels good, right? But my belief is that whatever the amount of money is, there is definitely a threshold where augmenting it with fulfillment in other areas has a more accretive benefit than just making more money by itself, or having a better relationship by itself, or having better health by itself. They all compound. Yeah, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I absolutely love that. Jeff, I know you got to go. I'm definitely going to check out your book, and I'm going to bug you for part 2.
Awesome. I can't wait, man.